now.
Okay.
Pierre-François?
Ouais, je veux dire, je ne pas voir. J'ai pas pensé.
Ça, c'est un peu le temps.
So it's okay.
It's okay. Everybody online?
Everybody's online.
Okay.
Yes, okay for me. Jean-Philippe Vandebord in Lille.
Nice to meet you, Jean-Philippe. Rosalie Wolf, are you?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, welcome. Eleni, your voice just before. Are you still here?
Hello. Hello, everybody. Yes, I can hear and see you all.
Okay, great. Marion Blondel?
Yes, I'm here. Do you prefer we keep the camera on at the beginning or?
During the presentation, maybe it's better to shut down the camera to preserve the bandwidth. Otherwise, I mean, you can stay on camera. I don't know. Lucie, you will adapt.
Yeah.
Okay, during your presentation. And Caroline.
Yes, I'm here.
Physically present, and Sylvie too. Okay, so I think I can start and present the member of the jury. So, welcome everybody. We are right on schedule, I think, for the PhD defense presented by Lucie Naert. Lucie will present during roughly 45 minutes her work revolving around motion, gestures, and sign language in front of the jury composed with two external reviewers, namely Rosalie Wolf, who is a professor at DePaul University in Chicago, Jean-Philippe Vandebord, professor at Institut Télécom Lille, in the north of France, two external examiners, namely Marion Blondel, who is a CNRS researcher at Structure Formelle du Langage Laboratory in Paris, and Eleni Eftimou, Director of Research at Institute for Language and Speech Processing in Athens, Greece, and three locals, I may say. So your two supervisors, Caroline Laroulette, Assistant Professor at University of Bretagne Sud, and Iris Alave, Sylvie Gillet, Professor at Université Bretagne Sud, also at Iris Alave, and myself, Pierre-François Marteau. I will act as an examiner and president for your jury, and I am professor at University of Bretagne Sud and Iris Alave too. So after your presentation, the jury will have the opportunity to discuss and challenge your work through numerous questions, I think. And so I think we are all set, and you can proceed as far as you are ready.
Okay, thank you. I will try to get the camera. Okay, so I will ask the members of the jury to turn off their camera and microphone. And I will now begin. So first, I would like to thank all the members of the jury for agreeing to be part of this PhD defense jury. particularly in the current situation. So now I will present the work I did those last 3 years in the expression team of the ERISA lab. My thesis is named Capture, Annotation, and Synthesis of Motions for the Data-Driven Animation of Sign Language Avatars. So sign languages are used by a large part of the deaf population. Sign language is not universal. There are many sign languages, just as there are many oral languages. The work in this thesis is done in French Sign Language, or LSF, which is the sign language of deaf in France. We can see here the sign for cat in French Sign Language. As you can see, sign languages are visual gestural languages. It means that the motion of the whole body are used to convey a message that is interpreted by the interlocutors via their visual channels. And this leads to specific constraints. Indeed, the definition of a writing system is difficult. And so what are the means to convey a message in a sign language? So first, we can use drawings. So with or without textual explanations. Drawings are mainly used in paper dictionaries. Drawings give information about the gestural realization of signs. However, they remain very subjective. A second solution can be video recordings, like the one we saw. Video recordings are accurate and give dynamic information and information about the facial expression. However, there is no possibilities to preserve the anonymity of the signer. And as a 2D transcription of a 3D phenomenon, there is a loss of information, particularly of depth information. Signing avatars or sign language avatars are a way to preserve both the advantage of video recordings and of preserving also the anonymity of the signers. They can be adapted to the needs of the users. The point of view can be changed, the signing speed can be changed too, and even the appearance of the avatar can be changed. So sign language avatar seems to be a very promising technology. However, how can we create the sign language motions to animate those avatars? So there are 3 main techniques. First, the keyframe techniques consist in specifying the key posture of an avatar manually or automatically, and in doing the motion, creating the motions between 2 key posture by interpolations. The gesture that can be created this way are precise and potentially unlimited. However, the process can be fastidious if done manually, and the gesture can be uncanny if the timing between 2 keyframes is not perfectly managed. The procedural synthesis gives a continuous definition of motion using rules based on mathematics and physics and the minimization of cost function to reach spatiotemporal targets. The gestures are precise and the content can be changed by changing the spatiotemporal targets. However, like for keyframe synthesis, the gesture can be unrealistic, unnatural. The last solution is the data-driven synthesis, which relies on real motion data. This data can be played back, edited, or supplied to a machine learning system. The gestures that can be created this way are realistic and better accepted because they rely on real motion, but the new content is limited or biased by the initial database. As we favor the acceptance of our avatar by the deaf community, we chose to rely on a data-driven approach. However, we formulated our thesis objective as follows. We want to counter the main limitation of the data-driven technique by creating new signs or utterances in French Sign Language absent from an initial motion capture database by taking advantage of synthesis technique and of the analysis of the annotated motion that are present in this database. To achieve this objective, we need to have a motion capture database with high quality motions. we need to annotate this database with respect to our synthesis needs in order to be able to manipulate the data. And we need to develop valid synthesis techniques to create linguistically relevant content. And the words in blue in this slide show the notion of subjectivity, and so the obligation to perform qualitative evaluation at certain steps. To address these challenges, we propose 3 contributions. First, the design and perceptual evaluation of a new motion capture database. Then we propose techniques to automatically annotate the motion data on different tracks. And finally, we used the annotated motion to develop synthesis technique, and we perceptually evaluated the synthesized results. So the outline of the presentation is as follows. First, we will give a theoretical background on sign languages. Then we will describe the 3 contributions. First, design and evaluation of a new motion capture database. Then the multi-track automatic annotation techniques. And finally, the development and evaluation of synthesis techniques. We will conclude with some perspectives. So let's first begin with some information about sign languages. And first, with some definitions. So a sign is a lexical unit of sign languages, just as the word is in oral language. An utterance is a set of signs performed sequentially or simultaneously that present the statement of an ID, an interrogation, etc., with an oversimplification that can be seen as sentences in oral language. A gloss is a written transcription of a sign in oral language. So this is an illustration of the previous concepts. So we can see an utterance in French Sign Language that can be translated in English as, "I'd like to go for a stroll, could you lend me your bike?" The signs are represented using drawings, and beneath the utterance, we can see the glosses between square brackets. And we can notice that there is no word-to-word correspondence between the sequence of glosses and the translation. The grammar is different, the order of the lexical units are different. So, other definitions. The citation form is the form of a sign deprived of any contextual information. It's the form present in the dictionaries. So here we can see the citation form of the sign ball in French Sign Language. Inflected forms are the results of the modification of the citation form of a sign to take the context into account. So here we have 2 examples of inflections. In the first one, the signer wants to say a big ball, so he's doing the sign a ball, but with a larger amplitude. And to say the left ball, ball that is on the left, he's doing the sign ball, but on the left. So this is an example of inflections. There are many linguistic theories about sign languages, but the one we are most interested in here is the parametric approach that states that a sign is a set of discrete values taken by sign language phonological components. Those phonological components often refer to 5 elements. First, the end configurations, which is the shape of the end characterized by the disposition of the fingers. We can see some examples here. The hand placement, which is the location of the end on the signing space. The end placement can be described with precise coordinates or discrete areas, like in this image. The end movement is the location of, the trajectory of the end over time. So it's shown here with the blue arrows. The end orientation is defined by the direction of the palm and of the palm normal. And the non-manual features include facial expression, mouthing, gaze direction, torso direction. In this thesis, we are interested in the 4 manual components, so the first 4, but non-manual features are equally important. Now we can reformulate our synthesis objective like this. We want to enrich an initial French Sign Language database with synthesized motions corresponding to linguistic objectives. And more precisely, we want to create new signs in their citation and inflected form, following a parametric approach. And we also want to improve the creation of utterances using the synthesized sign and the knowledge extracted from the capture data. In both cases, we need for an initial database. And so I will now present our first contribution, the design and evaluation of a new sign language motion capture database. So we need data for three purposes. First, as analysis material in order to gain knowledge about sign language dynamics, in order to be able to reproduce the same dynamic on our synthesized content. As a synthesis material to be played back or edited to create a new content, and as evaluation material in order to have a ground truth with which to compare our synthesized results. We wanted to have a French Sign Language database containing motion capture data with the motions of preferably more than one signers. And we wanted to have in this database isolated components, isolated signs, inflected signs, and utterances. So we listed here some of the existing French Sign Language motion capture databases. We can see that most of them have the data of only one signer. Their size never exceeds 1 hour of data, and their purpose is evenly distributed between synthesis and analysis. Among those databases, none were both available and contained the data that we needed, so we designed our own database called LSF Animal that met our requirements. So here is the content of our database. The LSF Animal is divided into 4 parts. The first part, called hand configurations, contains isolated configurations and letters from the fingerspelling alphabet. The second part contains isolated signs, so question word, animal names, sign with a change in the hand configuration for synthesis purpose. The third part contains continuous signing sequences with full utterances, with the descriptions of 26 animals. This is the main part of our corpus. And the last part contains grammatical mechanisms, inflections, and pointing gesture. We recorded the motions of 2 deaf French Sign Language teachers for a total of 1 hour of data. So in order to record the motions of the signers, they need to wear reflective markers that are located by infrared cameras. And the placement, the position of those markers on the body of the signers is very important in order to recreate the motions retroactively. And so we designed a marker set that was suited to the subtlety of the sign language motions. So for the facial and body marker set, we used existing work that we adapted to our needs. And for the hand marker set, we tested different configuration, and we chose this one, which was a good trade-off between intrusiveness and precision. In order to assess the quality of the capture data, we performed a qualitative evaluation of a subset of the database. And more precisely, we selected 9 isolated signs corresponding to animal names and 9 descriptions of animals in order to have both isolated sign and full utterances. We designed a questionnaire where we asked the question in a written form in French and in French Sign Language with a video recording. And we wanted to know 4 things. We wanted to know if the capture data was intelligible, and for that we asked the participants to recognize the sign that was made or the animal that was described in a drop-down list. We also asked the participants to rate the accuracy and the realism of the capture data on a 5-point Likert scale, And finally, we wanted to know if there was a loss of information due to data post-processing. And for that, we used 3 types of avatar representation corresponding to 3 steps in the post-processing, like those 3 ones. In practice, the participants only saw 1 representation at a time, and we compared the results of the previous question with respect to the type of representation in order to see if one representation had better results. So here is an example of an isolated sign, so the sign for duck in French Sign Language. And here we have an example of a full utterance, the description of a Dachshund dog. For this perceptual evaluation, we had 50 participants. So here is the recognition rate of the isolated signs in blue and description in gray with respect to the level of LSF of the participants. We can notice a different thing. First, we can see that there is a significant difference between the recognition rate of the beginners and of the native participants for the isolated signs. This can show the non-triviality of the task. Indeed, we intentionally choose signs that were close visually, like the bird, the goose, and the duck, which are done with the same placement. We can also see that there is often a better recognition of the description with respect to the isolated sign, particularly in the case of the participants without any knowledge of French Sign Language. This can show the greater iconicity of the description. We had an average recognition rate of 76% with the good, very good, and native participants. This box plots show the accuracy and realism ratings per sequence for the good, very good, and native signers. The median is in orange and the mean value is in green. And we can see that the median, there is many sequences with a median equal to 4 or above. However, we can also see that the accuracy and realism greatly depends on the sign or descriptions. Some sequences, like the sequence horse, obtain lower ratings, and we found that the participants and the signer didn't have the exact same way of signing it. So in this case, the lower results were due to regional variations and not to our capture data. The average accuracy was of 3.6/5 and the average realism of 3.8/5. So this is the number of ratings per rating value for with respect to the 3 types of representation. And we performed Kruskal-Wallis non-parametrical tests to see that there were no significant differences between the accuracy and realism ratings of the 3 representations. So to sum up, we think that the capture data is intelligible at 76%, that the capture data is accurate and realistic, and that there is no loss of information due to data post-processing. For these reasons, we used our LSF animal database for the remainder of our work. And now I will present the second contribution, the development of multi-track automatic annotation techniques. So this is how raw data looks like. So this is a fictional example, but we can see that this is very difficult to process. If I want to retrieve a sign or part of signs, I need to add a semantic layer to this raw data, like this. So this is an example of annotation. Annotation is the process of associating a label or more than one label to the data in order to describe it. And now, if I want to retrieve the sign for fish or for house, I just have to query the annotation layer that will point to the precise segment in the data. In the case of sign language annotation, the annotation must be done on several tracks. This multi-track data annotation can be decomposed into 3 steps that I will try to illustrate here with the example of the sign light in French Sign Language. So first, we need to define an annotation scheme. It means we have to specify the different annotation tracks and possible constraints on those tracks. Then for each track, we need to first segment the track by determining the temporal boundaries of the region of interest. Here we have 2 regions of interest for the hand configuration track. And we need to label the segment with tags corresponding to a finite or a constrained vocabulary. And this must be done for each segment, for each track. Usually, the annotation is done by human annotators looking at a video recording of the motion capture session. But this is a very fastidious and time-consuming task. Annotation experts must both be skilled in annotation and in sign languages, a combination that can be hard to find. The segmentation can vary with the different segmentation criteria of the annotators. There can also be imprecisions induced by the frame rate of the video camera. And there can be confusion or mistakes in the labeling because the annotators are subject to fatigue and they only rely on the sole point of view of the video camera. So this is an example here of manual annotation on the ELAN software. An automatic annotation will make it possible to avoid this fastidious task and to reduce the artifact in the synthesis by reducing the imprecisions and mistakes in the annotation. For the automatic annotation of sign language raises specific challenges compared to the automatic annotation of general motion data. First, we have often a lower amount of data available for sign language than for general motion data like walks. There is a need for a higher number of labels to describe the variety of motion that can be done in sign languages because the sign languages are full languages. And the motion are very subtle in sign languages. So this leads to the development of dedicated techniques. A lot of work has been done for the annotation, the automatic annotation of the gloss track, and fewer for the automatic annotation of the phonological tracks like hand configuration or facial expression. In the case of LSF Animal, we designed an annotation scheme with 18 different tracks divided into 6 categories: gloss, hand configuration, hand movement, hand orientation, hand placement, and other. Among those categories, we worked on the automatization of 3 categories: the gloss, the hand configuration, and the hand placement. And in this presentation, I will only talk about the annotation, the automatic annotation of the hand configuration. So this is our approach for the automatic annotation of hand configuration. We want to know what configuration is made at any frame. So we take as input a full sequence of signing, an utterance mainly. And in our first step, the segmentation step, we determine the temporal boundaries of the stable configurations. Then we label each frame of the configuration segment, and we perform a majority vote to determine the label of the whole segment. So first, the segmentation consists in separating a continuous signing sequence into 2 types of segments. The one that I call hand configuration with a stable hand configuration over several frames, and the transition between 2 hand configuration segments. We used the distance, the variation of the distances between the joints as segmentation criteria. And more specifically, we use bar dist, which is the sum of the variation between 2 consecutive frames of the distance d belonging to a descriptor set. So d here is the Euclidean distance between 2 joints of the same hand. And our assumption is that bar dist will be small during stable configuration and high during transitions. And for that, we compared bar dist at each frame with a fixed threshold to determine the type of segment of the frame. We tested different descriptor sets, and the one that obtained the best result was the all distances except bones descriptor set, which contains 190 distances, corresponding to all the possible distances except the one between 2 consecutive joints that correspond physiologically to bones and are supposed to be constant. And this is an example of a segmented iterance. Here we can see the Vardist quantity in blue. The automatic segmentation is in orange and the manual segmentation is in green. For the segmentations, a high value corresponds to a hand configuration segment and a low value to a transition segment. Here we used a threshold of 1.1 for the 190 distances, which gave for the whole data set matching coefficients between the automatic and the manual segmentation of 80%. And we can see that visually, the two segmentations are close. The second step is the frame level labeling. So in this case, we want to label each frame of the hand configuration segments. And this is a classification task with multiple classes, 32 in this case. We can see them here. We worked on the Sign3D database, which has the advantage of having ground truth, which are the manual annotation. And it was not the case for the LSF animal database. The Sign3D database is composed of 25 utterances, 5 of which were used in the test set, and the remainder in the training set. And in both sets, we have the 32 configurations. So the frame level labeling step consists in selecting the classification model and the descriptor set that had the best results for this classification task. And for that, we first selected the best hyperparameters for each classification algorithm that we wanted to test using a grid search on with a stratified 5-fold cross-validation. Then we selected the combination of a classification model and a descriptor set that had the best F-score on the test set. So it was the support vector machine with a linear kernel with the 190 distances, like for the segmentation. We obtain an F-score of 90%. Here we can see the numerical results on Sign3D for the whole process, so the segmentation, frame level labeling, and then the majority vote to do the whole annotation of the end configuration. And we can see 2 examples of iterances of the test set. For each of them, the manual annotation is above and the automatic annotation is below. We can see that visually, the 2 annotations are quite close, even if there are still some little mistakes. And I wanted to emphasize this part where the signer spelled the name Antoine with the finger spelling alphabet. And here, the end configuration are done very rapidly, but we can see that the segmentation and labeling are accurate. So we apply the same automatic process on LSF animal. And in addition, we manually annotated 1 iterance in order to have something with which to compare our results. And we were satisfied with the automatic annotation of the hand configuration on this iterance. So we used the result of this annotation for the last part of our work, which is the development and evaluation of synthesis techniques. So here we have 2 objectives. First, the improvement of new iterances based on the observation of the data. And second, we want to increase the content of our initial database with new signs in their citation form or in an inflected form. In both cases, we want to preserve the precision and realism of real machine data. I will first talk about iterant synthesis, which corresponds to an early work. In this case, we wanted to create new iterances using concatenative synthesis, which consists in concatenating signs or part of signs contained in the database along the temporal axis and in synthesizing the transitions between the signs. Our objective was to improve the realism of the already existing concatenative synthesis approach using the result of the analysis of the iterances that are present in our database. So to construct a new iterance, our approach is this one. So we take as input an ordered sequence of glosses. we first retrieve the signs that correspond to the glosses. Then we compute the transition duration between the signs, and we synthesize the transition between the signs to create the new iterans. I will first present the last step, the transition synthesis, because it is implicitly used in the following examples. So we have two ways to synthesize a transition. First, the pose interpolation, which consists in doing a linear interpolation of the last frame of the first sign with the first frame of the second sign. And the motion blending, which consists in retrieving the motions that is following the first sign and the motion that is preceding the second sign, and doing a mix of those two. For short transitions, and when it was possible, we used motion blending because it gave more realistic results. So here we have examples of interpolation and blending synthesis for the transitions. We retrieve the sign fish and to it, and we synthesize the transition between the two. The difference is subtle, but in the first case, so in the interpolation case, you will see that all the parameters of the end, configuration and orientation, change at the same time. But in the second one, the orientation change and then the configuration change. And personally, I think that the dynamic of the wrist in the case of the blending is more natural, but it's very subtle. So our first improvement is about motion retrieval. In this case, the goal is to retrieve the best motion among a set of relevant motions. And for that, we do a textual query on the annotation. And if there are more than one solutions, we select the closest pair of motions. And for that, we minimize the distances between the posture of the last frame of the first sign and the first frame of the second sign, using two types of distances, the Euclidean distance and the geodesic distance. Here we have an example of a random motion retrieval on the left and the use of our proximity search on the right. And we can notice that for the movement taken randomly, we have a rather important movement of the torso and of the head between the two signs, which is not the case when we use our proximity search, and I think it's more natural for the proximity search. The second improvement is about transition duration. Transition duration is very important in order to have a smooth animation. So for that, we looked at the transition time with respect to the distances between the last frame of the first sign and the first frame of the second sign in our database. And we computed a model using linear regression to minimize the least square distances between the real data and the model. And we obtained this surface that we used to predict the distance, the transition duration between any two motions. So we can see the results here. On the left, we have a transition duration calculated as a function of distance, but without taking our trend into account. And on the right, we have the transition duration inferred from the trend in the data. And we can see that in the first case, the transition duration is very long. It's unnatural. Better in the second case. So we improved the motion retrieval and the computation of the transition duration for iterant synthesis. However, the variety of iterances that can be created this way are limited by the signs present in the database. So we propose to use our linguistic knowledge of sign language to create new isolated signs. And we called our approach phonological recombination. Phonological recombination relies on real motion data that we edit by modifying each phonological component independently to create new content following a parametric approach. For that, we need to have a mapping between the phonological components and the skeleton's joint. We also need to have a database containing, when possible, the values of the phonological components. And we need to define a technique to synthesize the missing value when they are. So here is our mapping. So we can see in red the joints corresponding to each phonological component. So the joints of the finger for the hand configuration, the joints of the arm for the hand movement, and the risks for the hand placement and orientation. And first, we ask ourselves, what can we create by transforming the hand placement component? And we identified two French Sign Language mechanisms, specialization and pointing gesture. The first, specialization, consists in modifying the placement of a sign to take into account the context. So we already saw the example of the left ball. Our synthesis objective is to obtain the specialized form of sign by modifying the placement of a sign in the citation form. And for that, we use inverse kinematics, or IK, which consists in computing the posture of an articulated chain given the position and orientation of its end effector. And we relied on the fabric algorithm, which gives a geometrical definition to the IK problem. We defined two articulated chains corresponding to the two arms. And in order to have the specialized form of a sign, we translated the targets of the citation form. And we obtained those results. So we have the citation form on the left and the specialized form using IK on the middle and right. We are currently doing a perceptual evaluation to rate the realism of the specialized instances that were present in our database, so the ground truth, with respect to the specialized instances that we constructed using IK. And we can see here that we have no significant difference between the realism ratings of the ground truth and of the synthesized instances. And we obtain high realism ratings for both of them. So that's good, but this is an ongoing evaluation, and we are waiting for more participants to confirm that. The second mechanisms are a pointing gesture. In this case, we want to create pointing gesture aiming at different places in the signing space. For that, we decompose the pointing gesture into three phases. First, the reaching motion to go to the target, then the pointing pose when the target is reached, and the retraction motion to go back from the target. Reaching, pointing pose, and then retraction. We propose to synthesize the pointing pose using inverse kinematics, like in the specialization. Here we can see examples of pointing pose present in the in the database and synthesized pointing pose with the same target. And we can see, particularly in the second example, that the body is more involved for the real data. However, our synthesized pointing poses are still very natural, realistic. To synthesize the reaching and retraction motion, we used interpolation. Here we can see three interpolation profiles, the slope, the cosine, and the sigmoid. And we have on the left the ground truth. So the dotted lines corresponds to the position of some joints, and the continuous line to the velocity of the same joints. And we can see that visually the sigmoid gives the closest results. So we use the sigmoid interpolation to construct pointing gesture. Here we can compare the results. We have the ground truth on the left, the linear interpolation on the middle, and the sigmoid interpolation on the right. We can see that even if the results are not perfect for the sigmoid interpolation, they are quite good. And this is confirmed by our perceptual evaluation. Here we ask the participants to rate the realism of the ground truth, the sigmoid, and the linear interpolation. And we can see that there is no significant difference between of the ground truth and of the sigmoid interpolation. However, there is a significantly lower result for the linear interpolation. Again, we are waiting for more answers. So we saw what we could do with hand placement. Now we wanted to know if we were able to create new content by transforming the hand configuration component. And for that, we identified various French Sign Language mechanisms. I will only talk about two of them here, but we also have done work about other mechanisms. So I will talk about the derivative base and the specifiers. So in this case, our goal is to modify the meanings of sign by replacing one in configuration with another. And the derivative base and the specifier are adapted to this transformation. A derivative base is a set of signs with the same value for one or more phonological component that has a unity of meaning. So here we have the derivative base of the psychic activity. This is an example of a derivative base along the hand placement. So the hand placement is the same, but the hand movement and hand configuration are changing. In our case, we want derivative base along the hand placement and movement to have just the hand configuration that is changing. And we constructed the derivative base of the rampant animal with a snail that was present in our database with a Y configuration. We constructed another snail, still existing, with an H configuration, and a slug with a U configuration. We did a perceptual evaluation to rate the realism of the ground truth snail, the synthesized snail, and the synthesized slug. And we can see here that there is no significant difference between the ground truth of the synthesized instances, even if the slug has slightly lower result. But there is high realism ratings for the synthesized snail. We are waiting for more answers to confirm that. And the second mechanism for the hand configuration is a specifier. So specifier is the name that we give to the hand configuration when it can be modified with respect to the object or subject of the action. So if I want to sign to give a glass, I will use the C configuration. But if I want to sign to give a coin, I will use the same motion, but a different configuration. So we constructed like this the different gate specifiers. So we had a cat's gate that were present in our database, and we constructed the chicken's gate with a 3 configuration, a lion's gate with a 5-folded configuration, and a cow's gate with a S configuration. Again, we perceptually evaluated that. We compared the result of the cat's gate that were present in the ground truth and the synthesized chicken's gate, and we found no significant difference between the ground truth and the synthesized instances, with high realism for the result of the synthesis. So to sum up, we used phonological recombination of the end placement and end configuration to create new isolated signs, and we constructed utterances using concatenative synthesis. However, concatenative synthesis rely on a sequential definition of sign language, which can be seen as contradictory to the reality of sign language, where there is simultaneous mechanisms. So how can we account for simultaneous mechanisms like the one in the 2 examples? So in the first example, we have the avatar that is signing that a car is driving past a building, and its second is locating something on the surface. And in both examples, two signs are done at the same time. So this is not possible with concatenative synthesis. So we propose to use phonological recombination, not at an isolated sign level, but at an utterance level, in order to be able to process each end independently. We did that here. For this sentence, we can see at the end that the avatar is locating something under a surface, so it's doing the surface and the pointing gesture with the other hand. So this is a work in progress. However, we can see here that it shows promising results. So now I will conclude. So in this thesis, we designed and recorded a French Sign Language motion capture database. We also developed automatic segmentation and labeling techniques for different annotation tracks. And we implemented a data-driven motion synthesis techniques to generate new sign language content. More precisely, we improved the synthesis of utterances using a concatenative approach. And we created signs both in their citation form and in inflected form using phonological recombination. We performed different perceptual evaluation at different stages. So there are many perspectives for this work. I only choose here some of them. First, we had some troubles to process the movement, the subtle movement of the fingers with the motion capture. And so it will be very interesting to work on the improvement of the motion capture processing for the 4 fingers motion specifically. It could also be great to perform further perceptual evaluation with more participants. And motion capture data is very rich, and we only worked on a small part of our corpus. And it could be great to extend the kinematic analysis of the motion capture data to study motion or linguistic phenomena like co-articulation, for example. And it is also interesting to work on the automatization of the synthesis of new content using, for example, a deep learning approach like autoencoder maybe, that could automatically give a parametric definition of signs. So thank you for your attention. Do you have any question?
I guess so. Thank you very much, Lucie, for this smooth and enlightening presentation of your work. I think I will ask Rosalie Wolf if she's still online and if she hears me, to start the questioning session. Rosalie?
Thank you. First of all, Lucie, I want to commend you on this research. So there are some groundbreaking technologies that you have spearheaded here that I think are going to be models for other people to follow. People are going to be able to, your contributions are substantial to the discipline. So I do have a couple of questions. You've done this marvelous study of co-articulation of handling. Now, there have been linguists, people who say in our field are closer to the linguistic side than the computer science side. And I wonder if you had ever taken a look at what studies of linguistics say somebody like Grosswald, when they looked at hand location and co-articulation of hand location, if you see any similarities or differences with your findings and your approaches.
Okay, thank you. So you're talking about co-articulation, which is the effect of co-articulation is that a sign will influence the adjacent sign. So, for example, if I have a sign that is located on the neutral space, and then I have to do a sign at the head level, I will be inclined to do the first sign higher in anticipation. So this is co-articulation, and I looked at, for example, the work of Grosswald, and he found that there was a long distance co-articulation effect. So for the hand placement, so a sign could have an effect on up to 3 signs later. Yeah, it's not very clear, but yeah, there was a long distance sign-to-sign co-articulation. And in my work, we used motion capture data, which is very rich and very interesting to this particular study of co-articulation, because we had the position of the joints in space. And so in my work, co-articulation was more a way to have a smoother animation, because I worked on synthesis of motion, than a study, a topic of study in itself. But I saw different things about co-articulation during my thesis. For example, I noticed that in the case of signs that were that were derived from finger spelling, like in French, in French Sign Language, we have the sign dodo, which is the configuration of a D and then an O and then a D and then an O, yeah, like that. And in practice, we saw in our data that this was not really done. The O configuration was not really reached. And so this is an effect of co-articulation for the hand configuration and not hand placement. Another thing that we did is that for for the synthesis of utterances, we use motion retrieval. In our motion retrieval system, we favor signs that are close in distance. And so we will naturally favor co-articulation effect. If we have a sign that is not done perfectly on its usual place, but it's more close to the following sign, we will have a tendency to retrieve those two signs. So to sum up, I will say that co-articulation was not a topic of study, but more a way of having a smooth animation. But we observe consistent results with the one of the linguistic field. And I think it will be very interesting to work on co-articulation in our database, because we have a description of animals, 26 description of animals with variable sign and repeated sign. And so it will be very interesting to see if there is a co-articulation effect on the repeated sign with respect to the varying sign. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, very well. But yes, but there are more.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. When you were examining pointing gestures, you studied the ease in, ease out, or the preparation and retraction, and you looked at you found that the sigmoid was the best fit with your observed data.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, most of the utterances that you elicited were more or less in what I would call a neutral affect, or didn't have much in the way of adverbial modifiers. So say you had a point where a person was emphasizing the point so that you would have a very fast in.
Yeah.
Would you still, and the thing is, a sigmoid is symmetric.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So what would you say consider a different approach of expressing, so using a different model for an asymmetric, where the ease in and the ease out were going to be different?
Yes. So I used sigmoid because it was what I saw in the data.
Right.
In the ground truth data, I saw this S, so it was perfect, and the sigmoid was easy parametrizable. Was parametrizable easily, so it was quite good. But if I had a different profile, I could use, for example, a sign interpolation, because we have everything we need on a sign interpolation. If we take the sign interpolation from 0 to pi/2, for example, we have a fast in and an ease out. And the sign interpolation on the other side, so minus pi/2 and 0, it's like a slow and an ease, fast out, slow in and fast out. So we have, maybe I would use that, but I could use something that is more parametrizable, also like splines, for example, that have many parameters that can be modified to have almost anything I need. But naturally, I will take something like a sign, because
nice to implement. Yes.
Yeah.
Just one more. So with your finger spelling is, now I very easily could have missed it, but did you use many examples of transitions between closed hand shapes? Say, if you had an S if you have an S going to an M, I don't know if you make the M the same way or not. Did you have any examples like that? Did you attempt to synthesize that transition?
In French Sign Language, the M is not done like in American Sign Language. So in French Sign Language, it's like this. So the S F is okay, in fact, but
yeah. How about T? What's your T look like?
The G?
Yeah, T.
T is like like that.
As T's. Oh, okay. So in other words, what I'm gathering from this is that the manual alphabet's a lot more open than some other.
But
okay.
I thought about that in fact, and our approach generalized. Not so. There is two exceptions for our approach. The one that you said. So when there is a finger that is beneath the other, I think that there will be the fingers will cross past the other and in an unnatural way. So the solution would be to work with the detection of mesh collision, but we did not do that with our skeleton animation, in fact. The other exception of our work is the two-end alphabets for finger spelling, like in the British Sign Language.
Yeah.
It's very complicated to process British Sign Language because the manual alphabet has two ends. So we did not work on that. But if there is no M and N like this, and if there is no two N's, we can for fingers.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks.
That concludes my questions.
Okay, thank you, Sally. I will ask Jean-Philippe Van Le Bord to pursue the question.
Yes, thanks a lot. So very, very nice presentation. Thank you very much. Very clear. Very nice, such as the written documents. I thank Sylvie for inviting me to review this very interesting thesis. But I must admit, when I received the packet at home, I can't remember having ordered such big packet on Amazon, you know. And I saw that it was the written thesis, this written thesis. Woo! 170 pages, 71, 72 pages. Very big document, but when I read it, I must recognize that it's really well written and very easy to follow, very easy to read and to understand. Thank you very much. I learned a lot of things about French language. I could not imagine that it was such a complex thing to study. So thank you very much for that. But I have a few questions. Very interesting. So a lot of questions, but I will try to take only two or three. So you are using a mockup for your data, but it's a mockup in 2D.
No.
No.
We have the position of the
3D.
3D.
Okay, but with cameras.
We have 16 cameras. Okay. Infrared cameras.
Okay, so it's a quite complex system to implement to work with. Did you try? Did you read things about, for instance, the depth camera, for instance, the Microsoft Kinect cameras, to study the movement of the fingers?
Yeah. So we thought about that. So in the case of the Kinect, we just have the motions of the fingers. We wanted to have the whole body for our avatar, for having natural motions. And so we in the case, the motion in sign language are very subtle and precise, and the whole body is involved. And so we choose motion capture, but we also know that there are some algorithm like OpenPose, which compute the posture of all skeleton, but it's not working very well again for the finger motion. So we would have to take the motion of the Kinect with the motion of the whole body, and it would be very complicated to synchronize.
Okay.
So we choose the reflective markers and the infrared cameras. And another drawbacks of OpenPose and Kinect is that they do not process well when there is occlusion, like the end is behind the others. And with the motion capture, like we have 16 cameras, we always have at least 2 cameras that are seeing the markers. So we can do more precise work, I think.
Okay, so you never encounter some occlusion problem with this kind of system?
We did, but I think we had less occlusion than with another system.
Okay. Okay, that was just for my curiosity.
Okay.
You talk about the face and the movement of the head. I saw on one of your first slide a video of a woman signing the cat, and the cat was something like that, and with the movement of the head and a smile. The smile seems to be smile or sad face and so on seems to be very, very important in sign language. Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm really novice. I don't know if I can say that in English. Sorry for my level of English, but your avatar does not have any facial expression. Did you study that? Do you want to go further on that? What is the real importance from your point of view of face expressions?
Yeah, that's a good that's a good question. Facial expression are very, very important. Like you said, we had participants from our perceptual evaluation that said that they expressed regrets to the lack of facial expression. However, in my thesis, I chose to work only on the body and particularly on the hand motion using a skeletal animation, because facial expression are done with another process, mainly blend shapes, which is a linear combination of micro expression. And so this is completely different from the animation of the body. And we, in the team, we have some work on facial expression, and we plan to incorporate them, to integrate them to my work. In addition, it will be very interesting to have them because we have some signs that are only distinguished by the facial expression. Like in French sign language, we have too bad, like it's with a sad face like that, and I won, which is the same sign but with a happy face. So we need to have the facial expression, and we will add them. Yeah.
Okay. So once your avatar will have the facial expression, all the translators in sign language will be unemployed, I think.
No, I don't think so. No, because it's complete another work. The translator are doing a translation in real time. My avatar is not doing that yet.
Yes, yes. But maybe in the near future.
I don't know. I don't want
2 or 3 months. No?
2 or 3 months. Yes, of course.
So another question about 3D animations. What is the system you use to animate the avatar? It's something you implement yourself? I can't remember. I'm sure you write it in the thesis. Did you implement it yourself, or this is a commercial product, or someone in your research team?
So for the animation of the avatar, I had an already working system done by the lab, the team before me. So I had this platform, and I added my work, my contributions on the platform. So it was a motion retrieval, a platform that was dedicated mainly to the synthesis of full utterances with the retrieving of motion in a database. And so I added the improvement of the utterance synthesis and the synthesis of new signs. So a motion retrieval at a lower level, for the motion retrieval for the phonological elements, and at a sign level.
Okay, and because your avatar is, I would say, cartoon style.
Yeah.
Say that. Did you have any discussion with, I would say, 3D animators, 3D designers that are designing for comics and so on, and that are using specific techniques for animating them in a realistic way, but realistic way in the sense of cartoon? How can I say that? Because I've already discussed with artists, I would say. I was interested about the style in motion, for instance, in the body motion, not only the hand. And they have very specific tools and very specific way of doing things for animation to exaggerate some gesture in order to be well understood. I can say that.
Yeah.
You understand me?
I understand. I read a book from Walt Disney.
Yes.
That talk about that too. So I wanted to say that the avatar that we choose, the cartoon avatar, we bought them on it was bought on TurboSquid, which is
yes.
For the 3D avatars, and we chose the cartoon appearance in order not to be in the uncanny valley. You know, when the avatar is so human-like that it's just weird to see him move, and it can be very disagreeable for the participants, for example, of
participants can be uncomfortable with it.
That's the word. And so we choose a cartoon character, and for the motion, I do not personally meet with animators, but I did some animation course, animation classes for the university. So I worked on Maya, and I have some basic knowledge about that.
Sure, you cannot do all the work by yourself.
Yeah.
It's teamwork.
Yeah.
But it's could be interesting for you to have some interest in this kind of thing. I had a last question. I can't remember. I had the last question, but yes, about the evaluation. It's very perceptual evaluation. I think your work is very interesting because you integrate a lot of perceptual evaluation at the level of the creation of the LSF animal dataset, and later on for the synthesis to try to evaluate the quality of the synthesis, single gesture or utterances synthesis. Sorry. Who was the participant in this evaluation? Colleagues of yours?
It was so we had so it was not colleagues. We had deaf people from the deaf association. Yes, around the region. So around the department Morbihan, and in France, we put our questionnaire on different means, so on Facebook, on
okay.
So by mail, we send them. So we had participants from everywhere in France, yeah, but mainly from our region.
Okay, oh, that's all.
And we had deaf and hearing people.
Okay. And last question in the documents. Okay. It's on page 52, but you write deep learning approach just to because maybe I didn't understand. Yeah. So maybe you will be able to be clearer for me. Deep learning approaches which do not need labeled data for the training are massively used for spatial annotation. But how can you do, maybe I didn't understand, how can you do deep learning approaches without any labeled data for the learning process?
Deep learning approaches do not, unsupervised, deep learning approaches, I think, are unsupervised. This is not my totally my field, but
okay. Because for my point of view, for deep learning approaches, you need some ground truth, you know. And so you say that deep learning approaches do not need labeled data, so you can do unsupervised approaches. Yes, but with labeled data, maybe it's better.
Yeah, but
sorry. Okay.
There are some approaches where we don't say what we want to the algorithm, and it can do clustering using unsupervised techniques or.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think that was what I wanted to say at this moment.
Okay.
I think about it more. I'm sorry.
That's okay for me. So thank you very much. I have no other questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Philippe. I will ask now Eleni Eftimou. Eleni, can you hear me?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so please go ahead.
First of all, I have also to say it has been real pleasure reading this dissertation. It needs a lot of work to reach this kind of results, and I was really amazed by the huge quantity of work and the high quality of the work I read. Congratulations for that. Since Rosalie asked you almost all the technical questions, I will just go a bit further. Let us talk about your data set. Your data set was a set of selected concepts which have a high degree of iconicity in LSF and in other sign languages. Do you think this feature made it easier for your evaluators to give high scores? Do you think this helped them understand what the representations of the synthetic signs were? Because, and what would be the case if this data set included some kind of lexicalized items for abstract notions? have you tried before with more abstract concepts?
Yeah, the iconicity of the signs and description, I think, were a little helpful to the participants of the perceptual evaluation. But we asked them two things. We asked them to recognize isolated signs corresponding to animal names. And in this case, I think the iconicity is not so present. The iconicity is more present in the case of animal descriptions, where sometimes the gait of the animal is described. This is very iconic. And we saw that there was a better recognition of the description than the isolated sign. So this can confirm what you said. We also captured more abstract notions, more abstract things, like pointing gesture and inflected sign. But I think but we did not ask the participants to recognize them in this case. So I can't answer you with certainty, but I think that you are right that iconic description will be more easily recognized. Yeah.
This does not reduce at all the quality of work and the very, very nice synthesis results you have presented. There are many insightful ideas and ways to experiment with. But it would be maybe it would be interesting to have such kind of results so that you just depict with examples the difference in one case and the other.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it will be very interesting. But yeah, we choose this content, the animal description, because we wanted to have sentences, utterances, where there were varying sign and repeated sign over the description. So we took these examples. But yes, it will be very interesting to have some more abstract notions, indeed.
That would be nice. Thank you very much. It has been a wonderful, wonderful job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eleni. Marion Blondel, if you can proceed with your questions.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Finally, I will try to speak English. It's better for you, and I will manage with this. Thank you very much, Lucie, for your generous way of sharing your work, the way you have presented it in your PhD. It was really clear, even for people like me who are not in the same area of research as you. It was clear and very didactic, and so very pleasant to read. What I really appreciated was your great concern for the dialogue, the interaction between linguistics and MoCA. So you really try to manage the link, the bridge between the both domains. I think you really succeeded in showing the complementarity between the manual annotation and the semi or automatic segmentation and identification of segments. It was really nice to find more arguments and more details about this point of view. So I think you are like us on the linguistic part. You think that there isn't any magical technology nor any superiority of the human perception of the facts. So it was a nice combination. So I've got a first question that maybe seem quite naive or very general, but I really need to understand what is the ultimate purpose, objective of these signing avatars. I mean, you seem really precocious, conscious of the importance of getting intelligibility, accuracy, realism, and so on. But at the same time, each of your choice for the data, for the annotation, for the theoretic linguistic frame, you need to focus on one part of these constraints. And so could you please once again maybe, but tell what is the ultimate aim or purpose of these signing avatars up to you?
Okay, so I think first that they are not supposed to replace the human translator. We worked on a sign language avatar as a way, for example, a way to have on teaching application, teaching apps, where there is a human person that is signing on some apps. And for example, if we want to keep the anonymity of the signer, I will think that the sign language avatar would be a great choice. So I think they could be great to be used in the same way of video recordings, not as a translator in real time. I think it's very hard to do that, but in for teaching apps, for example, for translating a text in a web application, that could be used. In this way. They have the advantage of giving a 3D point of view that we do not have with video recordings. And I remember that in my I had a LSF course, and sometimes the teacher was projecting video recordings of a signing person, and some signs were very hard to recognize because they were made that we had just a 2D representation and we could not go around it. And in this case, for teaching, I think it would be great to have an avatar that we could see on another perspective, see another point of view, or we could slow the flow of signing in order to be more understandable. So it's, in my opinion, it was for teaching apps.
Okay, because I think that depending on what is the main aim and the focus you put on, of course, it makes some impact on your previous choice. I don't mean that you are not conscious of this, because you have clearly explained everything, but I was wondering, for instance, for the question of facial expression, I was wondering, okay, is it very important for this purpose, or maybe, as you mentioned, that some of the pupils in your panel they said, oh, I was surprised. I could even understand without the head with the skeleton. So maybe it depends on what is the purpose, and you don't have to focus on everything in the synthesis. So this was one of my questions. The other question, and I'm sorry, I need always to give some remarks with the question because I have to make myself clear. So you mentioned for the LSF linguistic frame, you mentioned Cuxac and Agnès Millet, and it was nice to get new reference for LSF and not always only Cuxac, for instance. But I was wondering if the question of the phonetic articulatory description wasn't missing in such framework, a theoretical framework. Since even for Agnès Millet, when she speaks about the space and the way you can derive a paradigm from one lexical root and with changing the movement and the handshake and so on, it's on a higher level of analysis compared to the low level of phonetic articulatory description. And I was surprised because in the state of the art, you focus on many considerations about, for instance, phonology or lexicon, yes. And then when you talk about the annotation and the proposals from the people involved in the annotation and so on, you introduce some of the colleagues' contributions on phonetics, for instance. So my question is between phonetics and phonology, for you and your way of considering the data, what is the level of, for instance, if you are interested in variation, is it at a phonetic or a phonological level? And for instance, you've mentioned the sign horse that your signer made with one hand. I imagine this is the kind of sign he did. And you said, oh, okay, it was maybe a problem, the variation between the citation form and the way this man has signed this sign. So how can you manage with this whole question of variation in considering phonetical and phonetic and phonological level?
Okay, so I will reformulate the question because I'm not sure. So you want to know if I worked more about on a phonetic point of view or on a phonological point of view?
Yes, and which kind of impact it has on what is interesting for you as for the variation?
Yeah, so I read the works, the work of Millet that you quoted, and she did a work where she explained the impact of each what she called phonological component, so hand configuration, hand movement, and hand placement on the different level of linguistic level. So at the phonological level, at a lexical level, and at an utterance level. and I thought it was very interesting. So I based my work on that, and there was many work in our field. There are many work about there is sorry, I don't have, there is the phonetic and the phonological are a little mixed often, and I think that in my case it's at a phonological level, like Millet, because I'm sorry.
My question wasn't clear, so don't apologize. It's my fault.
I worked. I considered the element as having some kind of meaning in themselves. So the smaller components. So I think it was not just phonetic, where it's just a way of doing. It was more. It was linked with some kind of signification, like in the example of the. Not the gate, the the derivative base, which is something that I found in Millet's work. In the derivative base, by changing the hand configuration, we have different signs, and but they have still the same overall meaning. So we can do a slug with a snail. It's like very close in meaning, and I thought more about phonology in this case than phonetic. Yeah.
Yes, I think it has to do also with you try to make an inventory of the hand configuration, and you said, okay, with Braford or with Bouvet or with Bonucci, and this is not always the same quantity and the same kind of hand shape, but maybe it has to do also with is it a phonetic inventory or a phonological inventory? And maybe, but I think we have the same problem since in linguistics for LSF. It's not really clear if people consider really the phonetic dimension or the phonological dimension. And I remember a presentation, a talk from Bob Johnson that you mentioned, and he really focused on that and trying to make us conscious of the at which level we are discussing things. So it's if it's clear for you, I was interested in your answer, but I think it's not surprising that it's not so clear.
Yeah, I try to think about that, but it's in the work. It's very unclear, and I was hesitating. But I think I preferred personally phonology, and I think that what I did was about phonology. But
okay, I don't know if I'm too long, but I would like last point, and it has to do with the previous one. So sorry, but do you think that the prosodic field would be interesting for you? I know that you mentioned also Wilbur and colleagues and the prosodic modifiers that can be introduced in the synthesis of utterances, but it's a very tiny field in the sign language linguistics. So I imagine this is not so spread also in your domain. So what can you imagine of in perspectives dealing with prosody of sign language?
That's very interesting. In my case, I really focus on intelligibility and precision, and I was not thinking about the prosodic cue that we could add. But with motion capture data, I think it's possible to extract the prosodic cues from sequences that are the same utterances, for example, with different prosodic cue. prosodic cues, and we could try to extract the features that are doing the prosodic alteration differences. So this would be interesting, and then we could add them to any sequence, to any signing animation to add a prosody cue. Like in this case, we would consider prosody as another layer that we add to the animation. Yes. So I had another idea, but I forgot. Of course. I also work on what we could do. So I presented what I could do with hand configuration and placement, but I worked a little about hand movement too. And when I noticed that when we slow down or accelerate a motion, that added a sense of, if I accelerated, it was like stress. The avatar seemed like it was angry or stressed or something. So just by working on the motions, the movement, the timing of the movement, we could do some prosodic simulation or something. So it was interesting.
Thank you very much, Lucie. And I would like really to invite you to come to the Young Researcher seminar that Annelise Brafort and Dominique Boutet have initiated. And since it is devoted to mocap and LSF and corpus data, and I think it would be really interesting that you would present your work and have exchange with people from these various domains. So thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marion. So I think I will take my turn before giving you the opportunity to conclude on different Lucie's work. Well, as I am the president, so I can decide. So thank you for agreeing. Well, first of all, just a comment. I had to agree with Jean-Philippe about very big piece of work that you have presented us today. And I have to admit that I had some sort of difficulties to staple your manuscript. So big that, in fact, we do not have a big enough staple machine in the lab, and I did a mess. But anyway, it was a real pleasure to read it. I find a lot of very interesting aspects of your work. And I think, well, I agree, it's very well written, structured. And I think it could be served as a sort of example for other PhD students that we could have in the lab, and who have maybe some more difficulties, and I think it's a bit of sometimes of an euphemism to write down their work, their contribution on paper. So it's very nice writing and easy to read. So congratulations about that. And your presentation is somehow complements all you have presented on paper, and well, you managed to describe all this work and this kind of how can I say, paving stone of a work. I have some questions, and about first of all the automatic labeling of the multi-channel signal, and I think it's quite complex, in fact. And you adopt a method consisting in somehow clustering your part of your features set, and I think you maybe, or I guess you were using some linguistic rule to put part of the features in some clusters and then label or segment these clusters. I was wondering whether we can find some sort of statistical evidence to achieve similar clustering of the features, for instance, based on statistical independence or correlation between the features. And do you think we can achieve more or less automatically a similar clustering of the features in other kind of movements or gestures?
When you are talking about the features, are you talking about the descriptor set or the hand configuration, hand placement?
For me, a channel is a set of
a set of
features.
joints. So you want to know if we could find the distinction and configuration, hand placement, hand orientation automatically? That's
more or less, or at least if we can find some evidence that this is a good clustering of your features.
Okay, so I used the linguistic work about the parametric approach, and I used that because it simplified the problem, because I could only treat a subset of joints. So for the hand configuration, I could work on the joint of the hand. For the hand placement, I chose to work on the wrist. And so I divided my problem into smaller problems. But I don't know if we could find the same clustering automatically. I tried another thing. I tried to cluster the in linguistic, the hand placement is an entire problem, and the areas for hand placement. For example, we have the neutral space, the head level, the side, and the other side. And in linguistic, there are many works that try to do this this space partitioning, yes. And I tried to do the same thing automatically. So by doing a clustering on the areas that were the most used by the signer, to see if we saw some cluster at this point, but I had no result on this. I did not find the same thing that in the linguistic. I did not find the cluster that they indicated. But for your question, I don't know. I think the different channels are a more linguistic view of things than something. Well, maybe we could. I don't know. Maybe we could find that there is a decorrelation of the, for example, of the orientation of the hand with respect to the placement. Or yeah, I could imagine that, but I did not work on that. I can't tell any result.
Maybe
or something.
it
would be very
maybe
interesting.
Have some evidence.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And about the ways you evaluate your labeling, in fact, how do you measure, in fact, how do you calculate or evaluate your assessment measure, for instance, the precision or recall? When you compare ground truths, I imagine that the segments do not correspond exactly.
Yeah.
So you have intersection. And how do you cope with these variation alignment of the segments?
So in the case of the evaluation of the annotation, we had indeed two problems. We had the segmentation and the labeling. And so in the numerical result that I give, I computed the recall and precision using the transition segment as another class. So we had indeed 33 classes.
Okay.
Instead of 32, sorry. It was frame by frame, and I compared the number of frames that had the same thing on the manual and automatic with respect to the one that had different results.
Okay, it's frame to frame.
Yeah, it was frame to frame.
And you have an extra class for the transitions.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So the result of the labeling was limited by the segmentation. If we had a bad segmentation, even if we had a perfect labeling, it would be limited by the segmentation.
It would be reduced by the error of segmentation.
Yeah, so we computed also, we just compared the classes without taking the transition. In another work, I removed the transition to see really the result of the labeling, and it's over 90%. It's quite good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's impressive.
Yeah.
Okay. And when you present your labeling results, you did not mention the logistic regression nor the neural networks in your curves.
Yeah.
Why is so?
I tested the logistic and neural networks too, but I did a first pruning on the training set with a cross-validation, and those ones did not give very good results. So I only chose the one that I had the best results from the first pruning.
Okay.
But the logistic regression gave good result, but it was very long to train, so I eliminated this one.
Okay.
Yeah, I did not precise.
Yeah, because in fact, the best method is the linear kernel SVM.
Yeah.
All right, and it's quite close. In fact, it's almost the same because logistic regression is also linear.
Yeah, but we did the choice that it was a longer training.
You have used the SGD implementation, stochastic gradient descent.
Yes.
That SVM that is very fast and very optimized, and this is quite good. Okay, I understand. And maybe one more question. Yes.
You're the president.
I am still the president. Slide 92. If you can go back to that slide.
92. Okay, I will try to share it.
Yeah.
This one. I will share it with the other.
Okay. So here again we find the sigmoid again. So it's quite a nice functions. I mean, when we are dealing with natural computing, in the nature part, this kind of function, smooth function, very, and well, it's working great. Till within the ground truth, you have noise.
Yes.
Okay, and we know that naturalness is often a question of well modeling the noise also, or adding noise in a smooth system. And do you think that you can improve a little bit your synthesis by precisely trying to model the variability? In fact, trying to build a smooth model and then add some variability, still by using, in fact, your market data to have some statistical evidence to build this variability model. And then maybe you could improve a little bit the outputs of your synthesis.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We could indeed take the noise that we have in the motion capture data, model it, and add it to as another layer to the sigmoid, and we will have something that is very close, because even there the sigmoid is very close to the ground truth. It's quite impressive, in fact. I think.
Yeah, I think it's a very good example.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Indian.
So thank you again, Lucie.
Thank you.
And now I will give the speech to Caroline, maybe.
Thank you. So what can I say? So the presentation was really good, as was everything you've done, I think, since 3 years you've been here. The manuscript was also very long. At some point, we wondered if we should add the perceptual evaluation in it, but it was already way too big. Although it was very easy to read, so it was a pleasure also. Hello, everyone. So I don't really have a question. I just want to say that it's been a pleasure to work with you. We had interesting discussions always. It was always very clear. You knew what you do. You tried a lot of things, a lot more than what we saw and what is in the manuscript. We also spent some time working on a teaching app because, yeah, we didn't talk about it, but we also made a prototype that we presented to high school students, and that worked quite well because they did learn a few words in LSF after a few hours. So it was good also that you played the game and went towards younger students to present them your work. Yeah, well, we are going to miss you here at the lab, and it was really nice to work with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So, Sylvie, do you want to conclude?
Okay, I will conclude, so I won't ask any question. So hi, everybody. So I just say some words about your PhD and about you. Like we discussed before, I think that you very often you are very modest and humble, and very often you said, "Oh, I don't know, I don't do very interesting things, and I don't go deep inside each of the problem." But in my opinion, I don't agree with what you said, and I think that you really succeeded. You succeeded to build some bridges between bottom-up and top-down approach in the way of in which you build really computer animation techniques, motion retrieval models, and for the animation of avatars on the one part, and on the other part, you really set up the linguistic processes based on a very strong phonological theory. So you really mixed two approaches that nobody does that. So that's very interesting. And there's some kind of methodology loop inside your approach. So I think that's very rich. And also this methodology should be put forward and should help the other people working on this kind of problem. So I really thank you for everything in this side, in this work. And what has not been said too is that when you are doing something, it's so precise, meticulous, and we have nothing to add because most of the time this is very good results, and we don't have to test after you or to have some doubts about the results. It's always very clear, very interesting results. So thank you also for your style of working. So that's only that I wanted to say. So maybe I could add something that I would like also to thank you for your warm and efficient collaboration. And I think that for the help also that you are able to bring to the other people in the team, and largely in the lab, I think. And okay, I think that you will have the opportunity to use what you learned within sign languages, and maybe you can use it in your future teaching job. So that's it. So thank you again, and congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I think we have to deliberate now.
Okay, I will go.
Tu demandes à Mathieu.
Oui.
Started receiving tourists, and we do not know what will happen with the small islands where people were very safe during winter. We'll see.
Yeah, same here. I mean, probably in Chicago too.
You are very smart. The EU was very smart to ban US citizens. But I'm very lucky is I live in one of the states where the infection rate has the positivity rate has gone down.
Oh, great. Great.
So the number of cases has remained constant, but they're doing more testing. So we're very lucky.
Oh, great.
Yeah, that's
Okay, Lucy is back. The decision, so the jury ended up with some comments, and we have somehow written a report. So I will try to read it. So first of all, you have exposed your reasons, your research, doctoral studies in front of challenging jury, us, obviously. And in a manner that was very clear and very didactic and somehow outstanding. So we are very pleased with your presentation, the written presentation, and also the presentation today. You have conveyed huge information contained in the manuscript into a form that was well adapted to the oral presentation. And doing so, you achieved a clear and coherent narrative. It's a nice story you present us today. And as a result, the audience could benefit from the main reason. It was quite synthetic, all the results of their work, and that was very nice to follow you today. You could show during the presentation the breadth of your research. It covers a lot of research area in sign language, linguistics, movement analysis, and synthesis. And it includes a wide range of methods and knowledge in different fields, and such as the construction of a database using mock-up data systems, and the analysis, recognition of and synthesis of movements and gestures, as well as the construction of emerging linguistic models and structures. The presentation also showed the experimental did. You showed the extensive knowledge of pertinent prior work also within the work of the community, and that was very nice. You showed also that you can gauge the limit of the work. Good research can open more doors also. So well, there are limits, but you can locate the limits, and you know what to do after. The numerous questions posed by the and for all these reasons, the jury decided unanimously to confer you the grade of Doctor of University Potential in computer science. And the jury added the last sentence, the report. I read it. Moreover, the member of the jury wanted to pass you their personal congratulations for the overall quantity and quality of the presentation, and encourage you to pursue your research work combined indeed with teaching for the benefit of the academic community. And that's it.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you. Yeah, I would like to thank all of you, the members of the jury, and my PhD supervisor, Caroline and Sylvie, because you answered all my questions and you were very available. And it was very agreeable to work with you. And I also would like to thank the people that are following the stream on YouTube, and my parents and my friends. And for those who are in Van today, I would like to invite you to go to the Dédale Café for a po, because we can't do it in the universe. So thank you again. Thank you.
Cheers. Cheers.
Félicitations.
Merci.
Bravo.
Bravo.
Congratulations. Félicitations.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Dr. Naert.
Dr. Naert.
Oui, oui.
Et demandez votre qualification maître de conf.
Oui.
C'est pas de mal, c'est une formalité.
Il y a 3
Yeah.
postes à l'IMT Lille.
Voilà.
3 postes à l'IMT Lille-Douai.
Ok, d'accord.